Well, welcome everybody. I think this will be our time to actually kick off, and you're very welcome as we start our webinar this afternoon, I should say, coming out of lockdown with a new mission initiative. We've been hearing from people across the country who've been saying how amazed they've been at the agility of our churches in during this these strangest of times, and the way that even the least adaptable churches were able to be flexible and work around the closure of the buildings. And it feels like there's a real time of reflection about what we might be heading towards, rather than just thinking about everything going back to normal. And so we wanted to bring together some people that have got some wisdom to share about this from Fresh Expressions, about reimagining church, to think about how that could be fitting for our new context post pandemic, or perhaps more accurately post lockdown. Actually the exciting and I think opportune thing about this next phase is that there's going to be so much creativity needed, but also we've already seen that release, so it's exciting to see that, and we want to kind of keep pushing into that. So perhaps you've come here today with an idea already about what you might want to do as a church, or with a group of lay people, or how you might want to take something forward that you've already started and that seems to have flourished during lockdown, or perhaps you've got questions that are about how do we engage people in that idea about trying something new. Perhaps you've had people be a little bit sticky and tricky around the idea about change. So we're hopefully going to be thinking a little bit about the mixed ecology. So how does church work in different ways, different expressions of church in the same place, even the same parish, and also then to start to think about some of the wisdom from Fresh Expressions about how you might start something in a really contextual way that will connect with people where they are. The housekeeping sense is that we'll be doing 40 minutes basically of conversation, like I say, around the mixed ecology, and also the loving First Missional Journey, which we'll be introducing you to and talking about. And then for the last 20 minutes, we'll have the questions that you've put to us that have been compiled by the team behind the scenes. So just to repeat for those of you that heard this before, but we're using the Q&A function in our webinar today. So do enter your questions, and then our team behind the scenes will be compiling them so that we can get through as many as possible. So I'm just at this point, I think, going to bring in our other panelists and introduce them to you. It's also worth just saying, as they appear on your screen, that all the slides and all of the links and anything else that we talk about this afternoon will be shared with you, and you'll also get the link to watch the webinar again as we are recording it, so that you'll be able to listen back and kind of mull it over again. And for those of you that weren't able to be with us live, that you'll have the chance as you're hearing this to listen in to the conversation. So I'm now joined by everyone, and hopefully you, if you were able to be with us for a few moments before 2 o'clock, you will have seen that Ed is my colleague at Church House, and is the National Lead for Pioneer Development, and has worked 2 years, I guess, in the central role. Is that right, Ed?
Yeah.
Ian, you're a practitioner of long-standing, and that's is that the kindest way to say you've been around the block a few times? I don't know.
Yeah.
But Ian's a practitioner in this, and also the Vice Dean, or Sub-Dean is it actually, of Fresh Expressions for Southwark Diocese. So it's great to have you with us, Ian.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Mike, many of you will know Mike's name from his many books, some of which could be used for doorstops, and some are much more postable through someone's letterbox. So Mike is one of our advisors for the Greenhouse Project, which we'll be talking a little bit about later on, but also advisor to Oxford Diocese as well, and all-round guru about Fresh Expression. So it's great to have you here too, Mike.
Great to be here. Thank you for being so complimentary about my books, Heather.
So we are oh right. Great. Sorry, Mike, I think you froze. I didn't mean to speak over you.
Yeah.
the starting point for this, as I said just at the beginning there, is the sense that people have been surprised and perhaps glad and to see how agile our churches have been able to be during these kind of strange times. I wonder if you've heard sort of stories of people feeling kind of empowered to try something new.
Yeah, I think people just putting their church in a digital space in itself actually has been a massive challenge, but also a way of adapting, hasn't it, in itself. Probably, I don't know what the percentage is, but many people were not online beforehand. Suddenly everything going online. So even that in itself, I think, has maybe created a spirit of wanting to think differently and maybe think outside the box a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's been really interesting as well in terms of parishes. It was suddenly when the lockdown happened that suddenly people were turning to churches in new ways and seeking them to be more involved in the local context. So I think that was quite an empowering moment. And the fact that the churches have responded so well with having online presences is a really good response.
Yeah, I've heard mixed reactions. Some talking like Ian, very confidently and positively, which is wonderful. Others are saying, you know, when we all come back and meet on a Sunday morning, the clergy will look around and we'll look around in our congregations and we'll find quite a few people who haven't come back. And that'll accentuate the urgency which we have, which is to connect with existing people, but also new people in new and different ways.
And of course, it's not just been about online, but we have noticed that people who've never set foot in the church or haven't for years and years are exploring. So there's evidently an appetite, isn't there, for thinking about church in their life. What role might that play in their lives? And I think it's something that's been really interesting is that the online space. I think people thought that it was just because the church had got relevant, and I don't think it was. I think it was just that we were there. Everyone is online. And so suddenly on their Facebook feeds there were church services happening, and I think it was about being where people are rather than you know, giving people an extra thing.
And I think that was great that it wasn't just all about worship services, because thinking about what Mike has just said, one of the things that we've experimented with was a spiritual, not religious discussion group with people who are never going to come into some sort of church service. So I think, you know, if church is going to be creative, there are new opportunities to engage with people miles away from existing forms of church. And it's down to our creativity, whether we're prepared to engage with our context in that sort of new and kind of more creative ways.
And we're going to get into ways and kind of tips and tricks, aren't we, in terms of how we might go about listening to our context and really kind of hearing what the needs might be in our places. So I'm wondering, Ed, if you start about the mixed ecology, and I know that you've used the words blended as well, haven't you, in that? And I wonder if there's that kind of sense of blending or mixed. You know, wonder if you want to kick us off in terms of exploring that.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, maybe a few years ago, I think it was Phil Potter, who used to be the team leader for Fresh Expression, started talking about being a blended church or blended economy. Some people love that because it perhaps describes a fruit salad where actually you need all of the flavors to make a delicious fruit salad, but you can still see the different fruits, so they're distinctive. Others find it a really hard piece of language because it makes you think like a smoothie where you're going to press blitz in the blender and mash it all up to be the same thing. So I think if we're thinking about mixed or blended economy, let's think fruit salad, because it's about maintaining and the distinctiveness, but rather than just saying let's have lots of everything, something about what's the relationship between these distinctive things. And that, I think, is where the growth could come and where the energy could come. If we could just see the mapping diagram that I think we've got on the screen. We've been doing some work for the last few years, thinking about what could this ecosystem or ecology look like, and creating a very simple diagram as a way of maybe mapping where you might be in this big ecosystem or ecology. I'll talk it through in a little.
Sorry, I'm just getting there. Do keep going.
Don't worry. So it works on two really simple axes. The horizontal axis has attractional and then contextual. So attractional is really a come and see model where there's a strong host culture, join in with what we're doing. Very simply, a contextual approach is going and staying beyond the walls of the church, and having quite a strong guest-led model where you're really kind of doing something with the people you're trying to reach. And the other axis is about legacy and founding, so saying what's already there, what can we build on the legacy of worship and mission, and what actually is nothing there at all, we're going to start from scratch. And it very generally, if you plot those four things, you get four spheres: parish, pioneer, plant, and pioneer. And there's lots and lots of discussion about what's the difference between church planting and pioneering, which perhaps is for another discussion, but this sort of speaks into that. And I think most of our pioneering activity is within the parish pioneer space, and some of it is in the pioneer space. And within that parish pioneer space, you might have what we'd call parish-based pioneers. So people who are doing lots of pioneering most of the time beyond the walls of the church, but they're doing it out of a springboard out of their parish, or mixed economy ministers who feel genuinely called to do both. They're engaged in their traditional inherited expression of church, and they're wanting to do something in parallel that's pioneering. So you could see this as a big macro economy. This could describe a whole town, it could describe a deanery or diocese, or even the whole of Britain, or it could describe one church or one parish where there's lots of different things going on. It also could be ecumenical, and probably it'd be very important that it was. So maybe to set that up, the question is, where would you place yourself now? And if you're thinking about starting a new initiative out of lockdown, where would you feel you need to be to do that? Is it the same space or a different space?
And actually, Ian, I'm going to invite you to think about this out loud, really, because in a sense you are, although you've done Fresh Expressions for most of your ministry, you are in some ways a mixed economy minister, like Ed was talking about. And I wonder if you wanted to share a little bit about how you, your parish work, the pioneer stuff that you're doing, perhaps with those on the fringe of church, and then maybe some of the other stuff that's a bit further away from the church.
Yes, thanks, Heather. I think that diagram is really, really helpful. So I think I place myself in that pioneer parish little circle there. And just to say, so we're just south of Blackfriars Bridge here, in a parish that kind of was really losing its kind of focus. So I was brought in here in December to kind of bring renewal to the parish, but also to reach the great number of people who don't relate to traditional forms of church. So in my context here, there are those who come here to work in central London. There are those that are super rich, living down by the river with huge issues around well-being, addiction and suicide. And then we have lots of people living in estates. There's 3 quite big estates, hidden estates also in the area. And we have a huge issue around rough sleepers as well. So the response is, there is absolutely no way that we're going to do one thing that's going to reach all those people and all their spiritual needs in terms of mission and evangelism. And what we need to do is listen. So we've done a whole listening exercise to context, and they're responding. So and we were just beginning to get going just before the lockdown, which is one of those things. And so just to name some of the things that we've just started. So we did this slightly crazy mission to spirituality in January, where all sorts of people turned up who were interested in, and that led to a kind of engagement with the spiritual, not religious, and discussion groups in the pub next to the church. There's a pub right next to it. So we run some of our dialogue groups for those people who are wanting to explore spirituality. In terms of rough sleepers, we were just starting to get into how can we mentor people being placed from hostels into local accommodation, a lot of that in the local community, and how can then we open up the gospel as good news to people in that sort of bracket. In terms of the working, again, huge issues around well-being. We just set up something called Stressed in the South Bank, which was using a John Main kind of silent meditation group to try and reach out to those trying to explore sense of well-being in the kind of freneticness of having to work. And there are huge numbers of people working in the area. And we've been trying to revitalize, and how could we do stuff with young children? So we've been kind of looking at using godly play as a way with unchurched kids from some of the estates and some of the families, and revitalize things around there. So each one of those was a very separate thing where we had to start with listening and then some form of loving service to engage people, which we hope in time will then build community. So that has been what we're doing. So we've got about 6 different things going on in that kind of mixed ecology way to reach out to those groups of people. But at the same time, I'm trying to regrow the Sunday morning Eucharist service, trying to do that the best that can be. And there's this marvelous thing, Come Back to Church Sunday. And we hope, depending on the lockdown, that we will do something about revitalizing that. So the vision, I think, is what's been said, is that sense of how can we reach out to people who are miles away from the church through lots of targeted activity, and then how can we make church the best that it can be in more attractional model. So that mission of going out plus the attraction of coming in. And if you can do it here in this kind of bizarre part of central London, you can do it anywhere.
And I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because it very much kind of gets away from that idea about one size fitting all, isn't it? And I know, Mike, you speak a lot about how if you're really only focused on one way of being church, that's actually exclusive by nature, isn't it?
Yes, once you've decided as a congregation to meet at a particular time and a particular place with a particular style and a particular agenda to worship Christ, yes, you'll attract some people, but you're going to exclude zillions more. All those who can't come at that time, all those who can't come to the place, all those who don't identify with your style, all those who don't share your agenda. And so the challenge for us as a church, particularly the Church of England, with our claim and our calling to serve the whole of the English population, our challenge is to become an inclusive church. And the only way you can do that is actually to start new communities among and with people who find the existing church inaccessible. If you want to draw in these other people, you have to work with them to start new communities among them. So I think, you know, the challenge for us is to be a proper Church of England, to be inclusive.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that actually being the Church of England and having a presence in every community isn't just about having a building or having a priest or having, you know, even a congregation. It's actually about having something that's contextual, that makes sense to people. And I wonder if anyone wants to come in on that, about what do we mean by contextual? What do we mean when we say, like, to make sense for people? Because I think sometimes people hear that and they think it's a dumbing down. It's like it's making it, you know, accessibility is just about saying, well, you know, we'll make it sound good for everybody, and that's not what we mean, is it? So I wonder if anyone wants to come back at that and kind of give us a bit of some meat on that bone.
Well, I think the key theological principle is about unity and diversity rather than unity and conformity. I mean, the Church of England has always had this problem about you've got to belong to us and be like us to be relevant. And I think what we hear of the gospel is that sense of how can we go out and be relevant for people in all their different contexts. And I think you can practically do that by the discipline of listening and responding. And also I think it's also about being creative. You know, we can't employ thousands of people to do all of this, but then how can we then do the best that we can with the available resources? So, you know, there is me. There's only a few of us doing this, so it's not a huge team, but I think by using what you've got effectively in that kind of commitment to loving service, you can do quite a lot. And it doesn't take much to set up a spiritual not religious discussion group. It's about a couple of beers, a book and a pub. You know, it's not a rocket science. And to do some of the, you know, to do the silent meditation stuff is like being silent for 20 minutes, I mean, in a room. So, you know, it's not like you've got to be an expert at these things, but it's just what can we do with authenticity, I think is the thing. And empower building a team. The one thing I think we do need to talk about, you can't just do this on your own. The idea that you kind of put in a priest and they suddenly become the solution to all things and you suddenly have a 500 people church isn't going to happen. It's got about how can we have a new relationship with the church being empowered and congregations, less about just coming and taking, but contributing. And that's what we've just started to change that culture here, that there's an expectation that the people who are part of this church contribute to the revival of the church rather than me being the only Messiah. You know, the sense of the priest can't do that. The priest can motivate, train, empower, and encourage, but we need teams of people to do this.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's something in that about participation in what you're saying, isn't there, Ian? And a really helpful phrase I've heard some pioneers using is saying to people they're connecting with in their community over a period of time, what would church look like for us? And it's not to say that we can just all have our own, you know, doctrine and our own theologies of things. I mean, obviously there's variation, but there might be some really core things that need to be there to be church and to be an Anglican church, actually. And actually, that could be expressed in many different ways. And if we allow that collaboration and participation, not just from the people who've got it all worked out in their faith, there's something else about letting people hold their doubts and walk with them. within that community of people, all kinds of different stages of deciding or exploring their faith, perhaps together we all work out, well, what's the best way for us to meet and worship God in this way? And it's quite releasing, isn't it? It involves a lot of bravery and risk-taking, but I think that does allow it to become something that's of that place for those people, not just a sort of cookie-cutter carbon copy of something else somewhere else.
I agree with Ed that it is requires risk-taking and courage, but I also want to say that you can start very simply. You can start with what you've got. If you've got a luncheon club for older people on a Wednesday lunch, you can say to them, any of you who'd like to stay behind for a quarter of an hour afterwards, we brought down the holy table, we put candles on it, you light the candles, you sit around the table, you play some Christian music, you have some quiet times of silence, some spoken prayers, you read a passage from scripture or some other spiritual passage, and it's just a quarter of an hour. And people can stay behind, the luncheon club continues. Then maybe after a few months, people's appetite grows, and maybe some of them want to discuss the passage that you've read. You extend that to 20, 25 minutes, half an hour. Well, you've got another congregation there. 25 people at the luncheon club, 10 people staying behind. That's another congregation. Write it in the book. You know? So this is really very simple. And if you do, for example, an annual bereavement service for people who've been bereaved in that year, you can invite them at the end to an exploration group. Perhaps it's a group where you're going to explore spirituality as a resource for life. And maybe 3 people come to that discussion. But every time you do a funeral visit thereafter, you can invite people as part of that funeral visit, if they'd like, to come and join you. So over the next year, a group grows to 4 or 5. Perhaps in 2 or 3 years' time, it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You are growing a new congregation simply on the back of what you have to do as a minister anyway, which are these pastoral visits. Very simple.
I think this is the thing. When I was a pioneer and attached to a church, a parish church, and doing stuff along the side of that, people would say, but when are they coming to proper church? And I think that's that thing, is about letting go and going with Ed's metaphor of the fruit salad, isn't it? That actually each of those different bits are proper church. They're like the same way that all the bits of the fruit salad are fruit, proper fruit, but they're just different and distinctive, and that's okay. I'm gonna Ian, did you want to come in?
I totally agree with what you're saying. I think the final thing is about how are we welcoming? Because if it's about, there's a sense of, I think it's really key that it's not about me just going to do this for 4 weeks and expect them just to come to the service on a Sunday morning. And I'm going to do this with expectation that you've got to conform. It's got to be that mission is God's, and I've got to let go of the need for being in control. And that mission is God's, and we are trying to catch up with what God is doing in people's lives. And I think that is because that takes the pressure off then, to think that we've got to deliver this perfect church. But actually what we do is follow the opportunities that God gives us with what we have. And that then changes. So the mission evangelism doesn't have to be this really threatening thing, or as it used to be in my previous church, that item on the PCC agenda that you avoided to the very last thing because no one wanted to do anything. It actually becomes something that becomes exciting because it brings a sense of unity for the church as it seeks to serve the people who live in the local parish. And it's exciting, and it's needed now more than ever, I think, in this post-lockdown situation.
Definitely. So we've already touched on this, and Ian's introduced it. So I'm just going to bring up the diagram that we've got here, which is what we call the Loving First Missional Journey. And so as you can see there that it's meant to be very much a movement and a flow. It's a cycle, but it's also, as anybody who's done this process will tell you, very messy and doesn't go in the right order often, and stuff kind of goes around and around. So we're not saying that this is all very simple or easy, but what we're trying to share in this diagram is the sense of actually you can move through of these different phases, if you like, of what you're doing in order to grow a new worshipping community. So the very first thing, and you'll see it right at the top there, is listening. And we're going to unpack this in a minute, so I'm just going to do a very brief run through. So it's about listening to the context, listening to the people around you, listening to the needs, but also the hopes and the aspirations of your community. The next phase is loving, and it's sometimes called a loving service. And I guess a really simple thing to remember is to say this is about loving service, not worship service. We're not starting with worship, we're starting with loving service. So having listened to people, what is it that's actually going to be an act of love and blessing on those people? Now, sometimes that's going to be about meeting a need, and we know that lots of churches are doing social action projects, perhaps even more so during lockdown, in terms of food delivery, or being really involved with their community's practical needs, that kind of thing. Ian, you mentioned about homelessness. There's all sorts of things that the church has always been really good at, but that loving service response to those that you know and have listened to and begun to try to reach and understand, and that loving, that serving isn't about being the provider, but is actually about, like Ed said, about walking alongside people. So sometimes it's about meeting a need, but sometimes it might be about exploring doubts together, or it might be about shared needs or shared experiences. And that from that flows a growing sense of community. And in that sense of people start to feel like they can belong to something. They might not know what it is. It might not feel like it's a tangible, this is just a group of people that happen to come together at a pub or meet on a Tuesday morning, or it doesn't necessarily have to have a name or a sense at that point. And I do think some people panic at this point and think, I'm not doing enough religious stuff, I'm not getting the gospel in there. But this is actually that point about giving people an experience of being part of the family of God. And what does that look like for people in a society where there's widespread loneliness, widespread breakdown of family and community, and that sense of being part of something and belonging. So that's a really key phase, and I think people it's almost acknowledging that and saying, don't worry about that if that's where you're up, that's fantastic. And then it's about intentionally, when the time is right and when you're listening to God and to the context, to begin to think about ways to share your faith. So perhaps, as Mike used that example about the luncheon club, you've spent a long time building relationships, creating that space and that safety, and it's only after that has happened that people would be willing to say, okay, yeah, I'll stay and say a prayer, or listen to some music. It will be out of the relationships. So that's where it is. But it does need to happen, because that's the other thing that I think we notice with Fresh Expressions, is that sometimes it gets to be a really great community, but we haven't really dug down into what is the good news for us in this place, and how do we grow in our understanding of who God is, who we are, and who as a community we're called to be by God, by the God that loves us. And so as the sharing of faith happens, then the next phase is that church starts to take shape. And I think it's really key to say that we don't mean everybody starts going to church. That's not what it means. And it means that the church, as I think it was Ed that said right at the beginning, what does it mean for us to be church here together? What does that look like? If we're a bunch of people that have got these doubts, but have also got this growing faith, and this sense that God might be asking us to care about our neighbours, for example, or to pray together, what would be the most sensible way for us to do that? What does the Bible say about what Christians do? And then making that so prayer and worship and service and loving one another and loving God happens in a way that doesn't mean people have to kind of let go of all of what they brought in the first place, but actually is about enabling them to grow in their faith in that environment, in that place, in that context. And then as that starts to mature and develop, then the brilliant thing is to think, okay, well, how do we do this again? Who do we need to be listening to now? Because as Mike's already said, as soon as you settle on something, you've automatically excluded some others. So how might we then go out as part of God's mission in this world? As Ian said, God is already at work in people. Where are we going to join in? And then it's about the process repeating. So that's what we mean when we talk about the loving first missional journey. So I'm not going to leave that up on the screen, but hopefully that's given you a little bit of a sense of where what we're talking about. And I want us to spend a bit more time now just sort of starting to unpack those first few phases. And Ian, you've already mentioned about listening. Do you want to kick us off with some insights that you've got about how you might listen to your parish, to your context?
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, so listening is absolutely crucial, because it's so important that we listen to people and remember that many of us who work in jobs being priests and those leading churches are in a bubble. And we have to keep remembering that we think we know what people's needs are and often don't attend to the listening. So often shutting up is a good one. So walk around, get to know your area, physically be present to it, literally go to bars and cafes and listen to the conversations of people. You might also need to, think about commissioning some research. It's so complex, this area here, it would be impossible for us to listen. So we worked with CMS and got a bit of grant money to commission someone to do that listening exercise, who was a trained social researcher. So some of the things that you can do, which are going to cost you nothing, there are national statistics for your area. At the moment, there's, you can look at the census 2011 to draw on kind of what are some of the themes in your particular area. Each diocese should have a breakdown of also some of the kind of statistics about the kind of needs, social needs, types of people in your particular parish and area. Talk to other partner organisations about what else has been done. So you'll find that, lots of voluntary sector organisations have already done some forms of listening exercises. And I was surprised when I came here how many also research statistics there are done by the local authority that you can draw on also into your particular wards where your parish is. So that was a really important first step. Second step was to listen to the stories of the members of the congregation that were coming here, and out some of their needs and aspirations thinking about where they draw. The other big thing that was really important was just to know the map of your parish, and to start thinking about the needs of people where they are in the context. And one thing that we used here as a kind of an aid was to think of the parish like a garden. And what are the kind of different soil types? What are the different plants that grow in the different parts of that garden? And then that stops just thinking about what we need to do to get people in, but much more, what are the kind of spiritual needs? So out of that, all of that, churning and listening to all of that, we've drew it all together, and we now have a report. And so what we've been able to identify then, our priorities are those 4 groups I mentioned: those who work in the area, that travel in here, who don't live here; the 3 estates and the needs that we need to attend there; those who live down by the river, who have got very different needs; and also the kind of rough sleepers. So there are 4 priority groups. Can't do everything for everybody because we don't have those resources, but prayerfully deciding what are those priorities for us. So that's helped us to listen and then think of, okay, so what are the practical things that God is wanting in that listening exercise, and where do we start? And to be honest, what I love about that loving service, is about trying things out. One of the things that we need to get away from in the Church of England is that we start something and apparently we're supposed to sustain it for the next 1,000 years, and we don't do anything unless we have that vision. We have to let go of that. What we need to do is try lots of different things, look for opportunities. What are people in your congregations passionate about trying, for example, not just about what I want to do, and then trying some things out and see what works, what doesn't work. So it's like planting a few things and watering it in the garden and see what happens. Yeah. And I think if you take that approach, then it makes it less daunting in terms of trying that out, and then piloting things and seeing what works, what doesn't work, as an ongoing listening thing. Yeah. And the other big thing I think I've learned as well, Heather, is as you go through that circle, it's got to be led by God, not by us. So one of the disciplines, for example, in that spiritual, not religious discussion group, was to wait for people to start asking religious questions. And one person said, we've been waiting for you to wait for an opportunity to force feed us the gospel, and then we would have left. But because you've let us the room to start exploring this for ourselves on our terms, we've stayed. So I think we've got to be so careful that, you know, moving from that loving service to community, we have to remember that we start with the church having kind of a negative connotations, that many people have very negative views of the church. So we have to just love people through that and allow God to break down those boundaries and wait for the opportunities to start engaging in mission evangelism through loving service community. So that's what we've been doing on the ground. And we took that all online as well as part of that whole listening thing. And I hope now that we're in this post-break, now we'll be able to get back to trying to do some of that stuff with real people in real situations rather than just online. But yeah, so it's about being brave and realizing, yeah, some things will work, some things won't, and that's absolutely fine.
I'm always struck by something that, Ed, you talk about quite a lot with the kind of guest and host. I think we're so used to in the church being the host, aren't we? We kind of invite people in, we dictate how people behave, what they're going to be doing, or even if we don't see that in ourselves, that's how other people perceive us, as Ian's just said. So there is something quite brave about moving out of that space, isn't there, into the guest space?
Definitely. And I think as I was thinking about listening, there's something very valuable and powerful about people feeling they've been heard. And maybe that starts to build that sense of guest culture rather than simply being a host culture. And in a coaching world, in the training I do, we were taught to notice rather than not to diagnose. There's something about listening as a way of understanding rather than just to respond. And Ian's described some brilliant ways of listening. It's sometimes tempting, isn't it, to think, oh, hey, I've done the listening now, I've ticked the box, it'll get me to the activity bit. But I think it takes real discernment to know, well, when is our listening phase finishing? I don't think you ever stop listening, but maybe you need to sit in that space for quite a long time. It could be a year, maybe 18 months, maybe more, to really try and understand and really listen in an unbiased way. And I think that then does grow that guest culture, because you're hopefully interacting with people as you're listening, as they're feeling heard. Which in a way then begins to build community even through your listening, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, well, actually, what you're saying there is about, you know, the loving nature of listening, isn't it? That people feel heard, they feel like their need and their need to be known is being met in that, and I think that can be incredibly powerful, can't it? And I think the sense of that diagram is to try and get that sense of the flow. And you're right, I don't think listening finishes, does it, in quite that, in a neat way. And I wonder if then people who have joined this and thought, well, I need to get something off the ground because, you know, this is a great opportunity, but perhaps what I'm hearing you say is perhaps like there might not be a need to rush. Maybe the listening is going to take you a bit of time. But I'm also aware that I think, Mike, you said about actually trying something, or perhaps it was Ian, actually trying something and it either working or not is actually a way of pragmatically listening as well, isn't it? And as you said, Mike, it doesn't need to be complicated.
No, it doesn't need to be complicated. And you don't always need to start with a blank piece of paper. You can start with something that you're interested in, and you can ask other people, would they like to share your interest? So you may be a family that enjoys playing board games, and you may ask other families that you know, people that you meet at the school gate, would they like to join you in playing board games? Can we do this together? One minister did that, and they got together a community around playing board games. But as you say, Heather, the listening doesn't stop. And so this minister kept listening, and he asked them, he said, if I were to start Lego Heroes, would any of you come? So then he started a separate group called Lego Heroes, where people come, he tells them a Bible story, and then they make Lego models to illustrate the story. And you're beginning to build something around discussion and prayer, not prayer as we normally do it in the church, but something rather different, but fits around them. Now, the listening was really important. Would you come? Is this going to work? How would we do it? How would we do it together? But it's also very simple because it starts with something that you're already interested in. And many of the fresh expressions I know about just come out of people's existing interests and passions, which they then ask God and then ask other people, how can we share this? How can we share what we're into? You know, you're into films, then, you know, and your kids go to school, then ask, you know, get permission and access some of the parents and ask them if they want to join a film club. You know, you watch a film one Friday, 2 weeks later, you meet together, eat together to discuss it. And it's a film with a difference because the discussion perhaps comes at it from a spiritual dimension. Let's talk about this film from an ethical and spiritual perspective. So, you know, the listening, just build on what you've already got.
Mm. And that's really, I think that's really useful, especially as I think for many churches, perhaps the surprise of people joining them online who wouldn't set foot in the door has rather taken a lot of people aback, really. But I hear, and sometimes my heart sinks a little bit when people are saying, how are we going to get them to go from being online to being in the building? And I think actually it might not be that way to start. I think what would the listening look like with those people? Perhaps it is just starting a Facebook discussion on your Facebook page that says, you know, if you could ask any questions, what would they be? Or, you know, you could stimulate some discussion around that, or have some private conversations with them about what it is that drew them there. I think that's really key. Goes a little bit with what Ian, you were saying about welcome. It means that they're, and what Ed's saying about being heard. You know, please, I beg you, if people have joined your church online, do listen to them, because I think it would be, I'd find it just so fascinating. To be honest, I'm a Christian. I've been in churches all my life. I'm ordained, and I haven't really joined in on any online worship particularly, because, or watched a broadcast service, because it just didn't really do it for me. So it's intriguing for me to think that for people that didn't go to church before, that they have tuned in. So listen, why did they come in the first place? What made them stay? Those are the questions I think I'd love to be hearing people exploring, because I think then you might well find that they're asking certain questions that perhaps we as the church aren't very good at answering in our normal way of doing things. So actually, let's think about how we might do that. Yeah,
just ask people who join you online, say, what would be the best experience for us to do together online? What would you like us to do? And then see what they say.
For me, there's a step before that as well, though, because the world that we're going into is not going to be the same world. And I see some of the comments in the Q&A here about, but we're in lockdown. I just want to reassure you, the really good thing about the online thing is that listening online, the dialogue continues. So what I'm hearing is, how do we give people room for lament and bereavement? Where do we give space for people to process their fears, their anxieties? And I think, I think the key thing is about, we can do this, we can still keep this perspective facing the fact that the world is going to change. In fact, we need to do it more in terms of this listening and response. So it's not that we just listen to how things were.
No.
So when I go, so the practicalities here are, the assumption is that 70% of all these offices are going to go back. I'm not sure they are. No. So I'm going to be in a parish full of lots of empty offices with quite high levels of unemployment, and with quite large numbers of people becoming rough sleepers. So the missional stuff in terms of that listening has to start again in terms of how I respond to those needs. So it's, yes, keep going with the listening I've done and take that onto Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, which we're doing, and not just about worship services, but also about engagement with other issues and discussions, but then also rethinking about what's going to emerge out of this context as part of that ongoing listening exercise. So actually the process that you described, I think, Heather, will really help us, rather than just go back into trying to do things because that's how we're used to doing it, to then face the reality of what's going to happen as we emerge or live with this COVID situation.
A really helpful analogy, maybe thinking about how do you encourage or connect with people who are joining online, is to liken it to people coming into a cathedral and just standing behind a pillar just to observe. Maybe people are wanting that sense of distance. Perhaps they are trying to just observe and tune in. So the worst thing in that cathedral analogy would be to sort of march them to the front and sit them in the front row, give them a hymn book. I think if it was me, I would never go back. But you probably would want to hang around the pillar, maybe have a coffee, maybe go outside and sit on the cathedral green on a bench. And maybe that sort of analogy of what we might do in a physical space could help us think about what we do in a digital space, like forming community in different spaces online, which may not be coming on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock.
Definitely. Now, I'm aware of time, and I've really enjoyed our conversation so far, but we'll invite some of the questions in. So, James, I wonder if you can give us some questions that people have been asking.
Yeah, some really interesting questions. So it's quite difficult to encapsulate everything, but we'll give it a go. Yeah. So quite encouragingly, there's a statement here someone has said, there will be a rush of people to try and explore what a fresh expression of church could look like coming out of COVID. Of course, that's what we all hope for, but that's countered by a sense of the Church of England historically seeming to invest millions on church planting, but not so much around this contextual approach. So perhaps, Heather, just to start us off, you could speak a little bit to what the Church of England is doing to attempt to resource this area of church growth, if you like, and also how we might help to become more sustainable. You might also just touch on the dispersed greenhouse early on, so people know that that's a possibility.
Sure. I think there's a temptation sometimes to pit fresh expressions and church planting against one another, and actually I see them as part of the mixed ecology, and perhaps I don't know what the most expensive fruit is, perhaps in your fruit salad, but perhaps some of them are, perhaps a banana is cheaper than a mango or something like that, and perhaps it's not worth getting too hung up on what is perhaps costing us more. However, there is a question about resourcing, and I think one of the ways that we're trying to address that, and Mike and I work together on a project called the Greenhouse, and James as well, with who's the voice that you hear, and basically it's a way to try and resource and encourage teams of people, not just one pioneer, but a team of people, to keep going through that missional journey and to learn from others. So we create learning communities, and so people can come together. Perhaps you're doing a messy church, perhaps you're doing cafe church, perhaps you're outside with forest church, perhaps you don't yet know what you're going to do, perhaps you've got the hint of an idea, but you still really need to do the listening. It doesn't matter where you are on that journey, and actually we bring people together and we help them have really good conversations amongst themselves and with the other teams in order to make some really light and easy to implement plans to help them be intentional about going around that journey, and what might be the next step, how might we take that next step together, what is God saying, what are we learning, what are we listening and hearing together. So that's the project that we call Greenhouse. Now what we've done is rolled that out before coronavirus via different dioceses. So we've got I think we had up to 9 dioceses and networks within the Church of England that were wanting to start greenhouses, and we've still got lots of those ready to go ahead online in the autumn. But we're also aware that many of you might be coming into this conversation from places that haven't got a greenhouse nearby or haven't got a diocesan plan for how to grow fresh expressions. So one of the things that we're going to offer, if you feel it would be useful for you, is that you could join a dispersed greenhouse that would only happen online, but it would be something that we could offer for you to support you in your new mission initiative. I'll say a little bit more about that at the end, but that's one way we're kind of addressing that, because I think what we've tended to do with fresh expressions is they've been a bit like wildflowers. They've grown up wherever the seed was, but actually what we're trying to do now is to cultivate those fresh expressions. So, you know, where people have said, I'd like to try something new, we'd like to be able to cultivate that and help that grow into a fresh expression of church. So I think that's what I'd say about that. Perhaps we can have the next question, James?
Yeah, sure. So building on that, we've spoken a lot and heard a lot about the mixed ecology this afternoon. There seems to be a number of questions around the balance that we might achieve in this. So 2 questions, and you might put them off to different people. The first is, do our panelists envisage that every church will be balancing both online and in-person worship? Or might we see some Church of England churches forteing on one approach as appropriate? That's the first aspect of the question. Second is, will this mixed ecology in practice lead to an unsustainable workload? Will it threaten the work-life balance, if you like, of clergy? And how might we actually achieve a healthy balance of this mix?
Ian, as the current vicar in our midst, perhaps you might talk a little bit. Perhaps we'll start with the workload and not just doing extra, and then perhaps Ed, perhaps you wanted to talk a bit about the sort of digital and physically gathered. Yeah, Ian.
So yes, I think there is a sense that that my workload needs to change. So I think there's a discipline here around what is essential and what's desirable and what can I cull. You know, I could spend my entire time trying to meet administration needs, but there are a few principles. I've decided to put people first emails second. So for example, I now do not expect myself to try and reply to every email within 24 hours, but actually giving myself 48 hours. And so there's a sense of how can I readjust my time? Firstly, that I pray more so that I'm led by God. So there's sufficient time that I'm being God led and surrendering to God's direction, but also making sure I've got enough relational time to see people. And not just in pastoral mode, that's the other really big thing. I could spend all my time doing visits and things, but how could I actually use some of my time missionally? I don't think this is about doing more work. I think it's about doing work differently. And as I said, I think the focus is on teams. Okay, so rather than just expecting myself to start something and then do it out of my own energy forever, there's something about, well, actually, who can we draw into the teams of sustaining things? So a mixed economy, I don't think it can't be me doing 26 million things. It's got to be, how could I empower different people to lead on things and work together in a more, so it does need a team approach, I would argue. And in terms of, I do think we need both and now. I think we are now planning to stream and meet. Practically, we can only get 16 people in our church space with maintaining the 2-meter distance. So, that means effectively going to exceed. Luckily for me, there's a lot of shielding going on, so there's no more than 16 people want to come at the moment. But I have huge numbers of people now wanting to watch not just the worship services, but the discussion groups, the meditation groups, and everything else that we're doing. So yeah, we're doing a both and it is possible to do that cheaply. We're using iPhones quite a lot with all sorts of streaming. And the wonderful, great thing about Zoom is that you can actually tie it into a streaming service, either on Facebook, practically, or on YouTube. So that really does work. The biggest investment we've made is paying for a paid professional Zoom account, and that has given us lots of opportunities. So please here, I think this is an opportunity to do some of the stuff we train to do rather than getting caught up in institutionalization. And I've had a conversation with my archdeacon to be really clear: do not expect to get a response from me via email within 48 hours if you want me to do mission, because I'm not going to overwork.
That's really helpful. And I think in some ways that the sense of team, I think sometimes it's a bit frustrating. People might hear that and think, but I haven't got anybody. But I also think is when we're in guest mode rather than always being in host mode, there will be people out there that they haven't signed on the line, as it were. They're not paid up church members, or they might not have faith that we would recognise at the moment. But God could still be and will still be at work in their lives. And perhaps there's ways to draw people into team, I think, that aren't necessarily there. And maybe, Ed, do you want to come in on the mixed ecology of the kind of online and physically gathered?
Yeah. So I think the word hybrid church seems to be a phrase that's been used repeatedly. Just in the last couple of weeks, it's suddenly popped up. That seems to be a very live piece of language. So if we're going on the premise that actually being online has meant that more people have engaged with church, and depending on what you think, if there is some argument to say, well, actually not all of those are going to come to a physically gathered church, then you probably do have to do something that looks like hybrid church. I think there's a difference between church online and online church, which lots of those who've been doing online church for a while will talk about more eloquently than me. But church online, just putting what you do on a live stream, that's one thing you could do, something, isn't it? Compared to online church, where you're forming community, maybe in a more monastic way in some ways, in a digital space. So they're going to take very different skills and need different capacities. So it might be thinking through, actually, what do you have the capacity to do, and what are you called to do? Because not everyone's called to do one or the other. We're just doing some work at the moment, looking at using that similar kind of shaped diagram, or that ecosystem, but purely describing what does the digital ecology look like, trying to map all the different types of digital church that's going on. That's coming soon. But I think a really last thing I would say is there's something about generous participation. And I know I'm talking to quite a lot of people who have already been online because for whatever reason they can't access physically gathered church, or who feel more comfortable online. That's where they found church in this time, or for people who are still going to have to shield, maybe for quite a long time. It's a travesty to leave those people behind and just say, well, we're all okay. We're going to go over in our physical space now. Where's the generous participation in that? So I think there's something about being a generous body of Christ, where we may need to do something, but there's a limit to what we may feel able to do at different times. So it's being realistic But I agree, Heather, drawing in people who have got different skills, who may not be at your core, could be your answer. A really digitally savvy 16-year-old might have all the information that you need to tell you what you need to do, and then you do that with them perhaps in some way. Who knows?
Brilliant, thanks. James, next question.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple to you. So the first is around how we meet the challenge of engaging the percentage of the population who research has shown have a deep distrust of institutions. I think Ian's spoken to that a little bit. Maybe we can develop that. How do we engage those people across that distrust, whilst also being clear about who we are and not being shy about God, and how that sits within the model that you've spoken about, the loving first cycle, and introducing early enough what it is that we're there for. And the second question that I'll leave you with, Heather, is the question of how we actually measure these kind of mission initiatives. And I wondered if you might be able to speak a little bit to our thinking around fruitfulness and the research underpinning the greenhouse model, so that in the years to come we do actually have solid research to inform the church's work beyond.
Yeah, great, thanks, great questions. Yeah, does anyone want to come in on those before I rabbit on?
Just very quickly, I hold on to the principle in terms of when do you talk about God, to wait for people to ask religious questions. I remember J. John saying, you never force feed a baby, but you wait for a baby to cry to know when to feed a baby. I think that principle is really helpful in terms of trying to get beyond negative stereotypes of church and Christianity, is if we go out there and we're very honest about being Christian, and we're doing this out of loving service to God, and wait for people to ask. I do believe the Holy Spirit unsettles people to start asking religious questions once they feel comfortable. And that's not in our timing, that's in their timing. And again, it's about guest. So I think that is a principle we're now doing in all our activities here.
I think there's a reason that the sharing faith comes after the building of community, because it is in those trusting and safe feeling relationships, isn't it, that people are able to move into that space of owning their doubts or sharing some of their questions. Yeah. Mike, do you want to come in on that?
So again, I want to just say, keep it as simple as you can. Start conversations with people, maybe you go cycling with people, and a friend who doesn't join you, I'm thinking of a couple, and she said, well, he goes cycling with his mates, and then what we do is we organise, because I'm not into cycling, I get together with one or two others, and we meet together afterwards, we provide the food, and then we all eat together. And when you eat together, you can have conversations with a difference. You can say to people, the first one who emails me a topic, that's going to be our topic. And you can have a conversation on any topic that's interesting to people. An item in the news, the soap operas that they're following, a celebrity that they're following, a film that they've watched, or a book, whatever it is that's interesting, the sports team they follow. You can have a conversation about that, but it's a conversation with a difference. And you can, if you want, then say that what makes this difference is halfway through, let's imagine that if God existed, what would he, she, it think about what we've said? The if is very important. If God existed, what would he, she, it think about what we've said? And what this does is simply give permission for people to elevate that conversation onto a different plane. And many people want to have very serious conversations, and they're embarrassed to do so. We're British and we feel we can't do this, and we're going to, appear odd. And what you're doing is simply giving people permission to have that more serious conversation. And those of you who are listening to this might think, well, I wouldn't do it that way, but you'll have your own ways of making it a conversation with a difference that gives permission for people to elevate the conversation into a plane that they wouldn't normally feel comfortable doing, but they really want, and they don't know how to get there. So, I just keep thinking, how do we get people together? What are the activities that we're doing that we enjoy? How do we get them around that activity? How do we then foster community and conversation as part of that activity? And then, as Ian is saying, see where these conversations lead you.
And just at that point, I'm thinking that there are a number of resources for kind of those conversations with a difference, if you like. So there's Table Talk by the Ugly Duckling Company would be a great place to kind of, even if you didn't use the actual resource with people, it might just help you think about some interesting questions that you might want to do, you know, with that. So and I think that kind of sense of opening up the space, there's things like death cafes, and you know, recently Church House Publishing in the last few years put together some stuff about grave talk. Again, if Ian's point about people wanting to think about their fears, someone said to me the other day that they felt like we as a society had had a collective near-death experience, and what had that done to us? And maybe, you know, we don't talk about death, do we? We're British, we're very British. Maybe that's some of the things that might create some space. You know, that kind of you don't have to start from scratch. There are ideas, but as Mike says, and I think it's such good advice, let's keep it as simple as possible.
And just one other quick resource, there's the book series that we did ages ago called Ancient Faith, Future Vision. If you want to hear stories of pioneers trying out different things, so we don't just start from scratch, people have tried things before, really do commend those 4 books compiled of different people's experiences, and many of them are working in mixed economy context. So it's the Ancient Faith, Future Mission series.
Yeah, I'm very aware of the time, and James, I'm assuming we've got tons of other questions, but perhaps we've got time for one more, and people before we end.
I think in terms of representing the questions, you've covered a lot of the bases there, but there does seem to be a sense of, we're talking about the immediacy of how we plan into the mission beyond COVID, but I think there is that sense of, once we start doing that, how do we know if it's effective or not? And that's why I felt maybe if you could just reassure people about the work that the Church of England is doing centrally. You've spoken a bit about the funding and how this area is being resourced, but how are we working within that funding so that beyond these first few years, we can actually find a model through which we can establish a good way of researching and asking the question and answering the question, is this effective? What does effective contextual British expressions of church achieve?
Yeah, sorry, James, I forgot that you'd asked me a 2-part question and we'd got stuck on the other one. So yeah, I think what you've heard today from all of us is actually that the kind of organic metaphors work really well in this area. We've got, you know, the sense of things growing and us trying to cultivate them, and that's where we've kind of picked up the language with Greenhouse. One of the ways that we've been trying to think about how do you look at the impact that you're having as a fresh expression is to think about fruitfulness. So if you're growing something, then if it's a healthy thing, then it's going to bear fruit and it's going to continue to grow. And that's so you can't compare the growth of a sunflower with the growth of a bramble bush. They're not going to be the same shape, the same size, they're not going to grow at the same rate, but you are able to look at their fruit and what they're able to produce, the seeds of the sunflower and you know, the blackberries. So what we're trying to focus in on is fruitfulness in fresh expressions. What would we expect to see in a church that had really tried to faithfully follow those principles that we've seen in the mission loving First Missional Journey? Not necessarily about did they do it in the right order or any of that, but more about, are those principles there? Have they done the listening? Do they understand their context really well? You know, have they engaged with people? Are people participating, even if they're not actually exploring faith? Is there a sense of going beyond the walls of the church and the kind of the reach of the church? Is there a sense of actually people feeling like they participate because they belong and they want to draw other people into that sense of belonging? You know, all of that kind of thing. And so we're undertaking some work to try and identify ways that we might notice that fruitfulness, which would then hopefully be able to give us a framework to work with, to be able to talk about what fresh expressions, what the impact they're having and how they are becoming church, even if that church doesn't look a lot like what people are expecting the church to look like. So hopefully that helps kind of thinking a little bit about impact, and that work sort of starts in earnest in the next month, which is exciting. Talking of starting in earnest in the next month, the Greenhouse initiative, which I've already mentioned to you, is going to be starting online in a number of dioceses. So the dioceses that we've got starting in the autumn online are going to be Peterborough, Lincoln, and Leicester and oh my goodness, Derby and Exeter. I have to get that right. There's lots that start with L and they all seem to be in the Midlands, so it's very difficult to remember. But anyway, we're really excited to be getting underway. But there is a possibility that even if you don't live in any of those places or minister in any of those places, that actually we could be able to offer some support for a dispersed group of people to come together as a greenhouse. So you'll see on the screen there's the churchofengland.org/greenhouse, and that's a new website which we've only just begun populating, but is a place where you can go to find out a little bit more about greenhouse. And then if you are interested in thinking about how you and your team of people that you have around you would be able to get some support to cultivate a new mission initiative and hopefully learn more from the wisdom of Fresh Expressions, then do drop us an email, and that's greenhouse@churchofengland.org. There are some provisos on that, in that we do need you to have a team around you. Now, when we say team, we might mean one other person or, you know, two other people. It doesn't need to be a large, but it needs to be more than just an idea you've had. It needs to be something that you've, that even if you haven't actually got an idea of what to do, but there's a few people around you that want to do something together. So that's one of our provisos at this stage. But however, having said that, we are really keen to continue offering support for people that perhaps just want to keep thinking about Fresh Expressions and what they can learn. So I just also want to point you to the Godsend app. It's available in either the Android or the Apple web stores. You can download it for free. It's been put together by our friends at Fresh Expressions Limited, and they've created an app that gives you a way to explore that loving First Missional Journey. So it's all set up to understand all of those different areas of the process, and there's lots of pioneers on there sharing their stories about how they've gone about it. So I do commend that to you. That's a really good place to start if you're thinking about, if you've really liked hearing about the Loving First Missional Journey and want to think a little bit more. I'd really commend to you the Godsend app to get, and I know that my colleague Mike is also working on a book that will come out of that material, so that there'll be a different way to access it coming up in the autumn. So I think, sadly, because I've really enjoyed our conversation, everyone. So thank you to Ed and Ian and Mike for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to all of you who've stayed around right till the end and have been part of the conversation. Again, thank you for all your questions. I know that it's frustrating that we weren't able to get to all of them, but like we said at the beginning, we will be capturing them all in order to make sure that we're kind of listening to what you are wanting to find out more about. So on that note, we just want to say thanks again, and all the best. God bless, and we'll hopefully see you again soon for another webinar in the Evangelism and Discipleship series. Bye everyone.